morning. A warm welcome to everyone on this rainy January morning to here, CUC's temporary home in our new hometown of Westwood. This liberal religious congregation welcomes newcomers, members, and friends gathered here and virtually to today's worship service. My name is Tom Lupfer, and I'm currently serving as the chair of the Endowment Trust Fund. CUC is an inclusive community of all ages, which embraces diversity in identity, expression, and spiritual belief. Many of our members and friends find inspiration, hope, and renewal with us, and we hope that you will find something meaningful about our time together today. If you're visiting in person, please be sure to say hello to one of our welcome hosts. Could you indicate? There they are. And if you're visiting us online, we invite you to sign our guest book by providing us with your name and contact info. The link for the guest book has been provided in the chat at the bottom of the screen. We're grateful for all those helping to make this morning's service happen, including the Reverend Andrée Cornelia, music director Matt Anderson, and our tech team, Phil Sosinsky and John Freund. We invite you to stay after today's service for our coffee hour sponsored by the youth group and some conversation and connection here in this space. And now, as we prepare to begin the service, I ask everyone to please check, as I am, and make sure that your phone is in worship mode so we are not interrupted. If you're joining us online, we encourage you to have your own chalice ready to light as we light our chalice here in the worship space. I have two quick announcements this morning. We'd like to welcome to our service today the Neighboring Faiths class from our sibling UU congregation in Montclair. Please be sure to greet them after service today and welcome them to CUC. They are here learning about different Unitarian and Universalist congregations. And the Interfaith Brotherhood and Sisterhood of Bergen County is hosting an annual brunch on Monday, February 19th at 10 a.m. at Seasons Catering in Washington Township. This year's theme is Restoring Community, and this is the first brunch that the group has offered since 2020. Join members from our local Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, Sikh, Jain, Baha'i, and UU congregations for good food and conversation. Tickets for the brunch cost $50, but that cost can be covered by CUC if needed. See Reverend Andrée for tickets. And now I'd like to invite Sia from the youth group up to make an announcement about their fundraiser for their Prague trip.
Hello, everyone. I just wanted to share some awesome news with the Central Unitarian Church. Our youth group has reached our faith-fi goal and raised over $14,000. This is a huge milestone, and it's all thanks to the dedication and hard work of our amazing young members and the generous support of our community. Thank you to our wonderful chaperones, Joseph Mohawk and Michael Patrick, who are working diligently to make our Prague trip happen. Let's keep this positive energy flowing and stay tuned to other incredible fundraising initiatives that we have planned in the future.
And I have one other good news announcement this morning. In case you didn't see it in our weekly e-news, we went in front of the zoning board again here in Westwood on Monday, and we passed unanimously. We were approved. Thank you. We were approved for our requested variances for our new building over at 36 Bergen Street, so that clears the way for us to move through the process of closing on the building, and our hope is that we can begin doing some construction by this summer. So we've got a lot of good work ahead of us, and I'm really happy to announce that we're officially shifting into this new chapter. With all that lovely good news from both the youth group and from the design group, let us now begin moving into our service by taking a moment to turn to those near you and offering them a warm greeting. Good morning. Good morning. Definitely does not want to stay wet. Oh, no. Hello down there. Here we are held by a love that soothes us when we are afraid, anxious, or uncertain about what is to come. Here we are comforted by a love that reminds us that we are whole, that we never need to hide a part of ourselves, that we are not defined by our trauma or our suffering, that we are loved for exactly who we are. Here, we are filled with a love that moves beyond our individual selves by allowing us to feel in our bones our deep interconnection to each other. Here, we are called by a love that transforms us, that pushes us to make the world a place of collective liberation, a love that declares we are needed, each and every one of us. The future we imagine won't happen on its own. We only arrive at beloved community together. So come, let us be held, let us be comforted, let us be filled, let us be called. Let us rest in this love. I invite you to rise in body or spirit for our opening hymn. It's 1:30 in the Gray Hymnal. Our lyrics will be up here on the screen. This is a hymn that we really don't sing very often. So I'm going to ask Matt to play it through once for us. And it's a pretty simple hymn, but we will make our way through it. A liberating rose.
Please join me in our chalice lighting words as projected on the screen. We light this chalice to remind us of our dreams, to nourish our heart, mind, and spirit, to work towards a better world for all, to embrace the whole of our human experience, to honor our past and our gifts of the present, to create a community where each of us may find healing, transformation, and hope.
I bring a story to share today. It's called The Case for Loving, the Fight for Interracial Marriage by Selena Alco and illustrated by Sean Quayles and Selena Alco. I want to wait a second for those pictures to come up. There we are. We'll go to our first page, Phil. First comes love, then comes marriage. Donald, Peggy, and Sydney had two parents who loved them and who loved each other. In fact, from almost the moment Richard Loving met Mildred Jeter, they wanted to get married and have a family. For them, it wasn't that simple. Here's why. Richard was white, a fair-skinned boy who got quickly sunburned in July. Mildred was what they called colored in those days. Her skin was a creamy caramel. In 1958, they lived in a small town of Central Point, Virginia, where people of every shade from the color of chamomile tea to summer midnight made their homes. Richard Loving was a tall, quiet man with fair skin and broad shoulders. The person he loved most was Mildred Jeter. Mildred was part African American, part Native American, and she was thin as a rail, and that's how she got the nickname String Bean. When Richard popped the question, String Bean jumped with joy. The two were in love, and they felt they should have the right to get married. Sadly, that right did not exist, not in Virginia or in 16 other states. In those places, marriages between people of different races was against the law. 100 years earlier, slavery divided America along color lines. And even after slavery ended, some white people weren't used to blacks being free, let alone free to marry whom they choose. If you married someone who had skin color unlike your own, you could go to jail. And Mildred and Richard wanted to get married, but they did not want to spend any time in prison. Although they couldn't have a legal marriage in Virginia, they went right next door to Washington, D.C., where they could. So they invited a few friends and family to witness their wedding across street lines. At the ceremony, nobody objected when Richard said, "I do," and Mildred said, "I do." The Lovings were officially pronounced husband and wife. The blushing bride and her groom smiled all the way from D.C. back to their house in Virginia. They couldn't wait to start a family. But soon something terrible happened. In the middle of the night, they were awoken in their sleep. It was the police. An officer shouted at Richard, "What are you doing with that woman?" And Richard proudly pointed to the marriage certificate hanging on the wall. "That's not good here," the policeman boomed. And just like that, Mildred and Richard were taken away and locked up in jail. They were charged with unlawful cohabitation, which means living together against the law. The Lovings didn't think there was anything unlawful about love at all. If anything, the way they were treated should have been unlawful. After a few nights behind bars, Richard and Mildred were told they had to leave Virginia if they wanted to live together as Mr. and Mrs. Loving. So with heavy hearts, the pair hugged their family packed their bags, and left their home. They tried to make a life for themselves in D.C. Richard found a job laying bricks, and Stringbean gave birth to 3 babies, 3 different shades of milk chocolate brown: Donald, Peggy, and Sydney. But the city didn't suit the Lovings. There were too many cars, and there was so much concrete. They missed Central Point with its rolling hills and open spaces. They missed their friends and family. They missed their home. They wanted to return to Virginia for good, so they hired lawyers to fight for what is right. By now, it was 1966, and times they were a-changin'. Brand new ideas like equal rights for people of all colors were replacing old, fearful ways of living. The lawyers worked around the clock to make a case for interracial marriage as strong as possible. It was time to take the Loving case all the way to the Supreme Court. On June 12, 1967, when the case of Loving versus Virginia began, Richard and Mildred stayed home with Donald, Peggy, and Sydney. They were all nervous and afraid they would not win. The state argued that in order to preserve the, quote, purity of the white race, blacks and whites must remain separated. Then it was the Loving lawyers' turn to present their case. They said it was unconstitutional to make marriage a crime because of race. And they read a message from Richard himself. Tell the court I love my wife, and it's just unfair that I can't live with her in Virginia. It didn't take long for the decision to be made. It was unanimous. The court ruled in favor of the Lovings. Interracial couples could now legally marry in Virginia. Richard and Mildred hugged. They won the right to their own love. They were free at last. Over 9 years after their arrest, the Lovings packed their bags one final time. Richard planned to build a big, roomy brick house in Central Point. Stringbean was ready to start their life over. The Loving family returned to Virginia to live, happily and legally ever after.
Let us now look into our hearts and see what is available there. How much love, how much generosity, how much faith, how much gratitude, how much hope. And let us take our offering from that account. Whether your offering is your time, your talents, or your treasure, it will now be gratefully received. Please join me in our dedication words. We dedicate these gifts in the service of our mission to welcome all into a home of spiritual diversity that challenges us to become our best selves, to minister to one another in love, and to serve the greater community.
Now we enter into a time of meditation, sharing together the joys and sorrows of this community. This is something we do together each week as a way of caring for each other. I have some joys and sorrows which were submitted to me ahead of time. I will read those out loud, and then I will share out loud any joys or sorrows from those who are attending online. So if you are online, please take a moment right now to share any joys or sorrows in the chat. I'll then turn back to this room and invite you to share out loud the name of anybody else you're holding in your heart. From there, we'll enter into a moment of silence and into a moment of prayer. But let us prepare ourselves first. Let us take a breath together. Let's breathe in the breath of life. Let's breathe out a breath of love. Breathing together into this shared space, the space of community and love. As we share and receive today the joys and sorrows for this community for Sunday, January 28th. Am I correct? January 28th, thank you, 2024. All these joys and all these sorrows, let us hold them together in our hearts, those that we have spoken and those that remain unspoken. Let's hold them together as we enter into a moment of silence. Spirit of life, we always remain uncertain with what the future brings. The pain and suffering of this world, the brokenness we witness all around us, compounds that uncertainty. Our hearts break from the death and violence of this world brought about by disconnection and hatred. We might yell out in anger, fearing that our voices will be drowned out, that democracy will falter under those wielding their power to dismantle it. Yet, Spirit of life, through you we experience liberating love. Through you we remember our deep interconnection to all living beings. Through you, we share the joys of living. Through you, we focus our attention on each other. Through you, we learn to build bridges. Through you, we find collective ways to move forward to a brighter tomorrow. Through you, may we love the hell out of this world. Blessed be. Amen. I invite you to remain seated for this next hymn in this meditative state. It says, "There is more love somewhere." We have two readings we are offering you today. The first comes from the Christian New Testament, 1 Corinthians 13, verses 1 through 8. If I speak in the tongues of mortals and angels, but do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but I have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all my possessions, and if I hand over my body so that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable. It does not keep a record of wrongs. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but it rejoices in truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. But as for prophecies, they will come to an end. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will come to an end.
Our second reading is Love and Justice by Reverend Tess Baumberger, and it's based on 1 Corinthians. Love is kind with people, but impatient with injustice. Love is assertive and respectful. Love listens to the anger of those who experience oppression without responding, without defending, without interrupting, without explaining. It listens with compassion, seeking always to understand. Love is slow to anger, especially at the start or end of life, and with anyone who the world discounts. Yet anger can be a part of love. Consider the force from which parents defend their young. Love fears for those it loves, for what it loves. When who or what it loves cannot defend itself, love rises to defend. When those it loves have the power of defense, it takes their lead with humility and courage. Love assists, empowers, and frees. Love's anger rises to meet injustice in considered ways that help correct it. Love is willing to examine itself, its thoughts, actions, and unmediated bias. It recognizes one's power to harm or to be part of systems of harm, with or without awareness. But once aware, it can only intend to make amends, to right the wrongs, to change the systems that legislate hatred. Love is always willing to change, always to learn, always to heal. Love rejoices in truth and in equity. There is no limit to love's steady presence, or its holding us, gently but insistently, to what is right.
I've always appreciated the fact that loving is the name of the couple at the center of the case which made interracial marriage legal and set a precedent paving the way for marriage equality 40 years later, right? It's like a screenwriter made up this name. This story, of course, yes, it's about romantic love, as exemplified by Richard Loving's note to the Supreme Court justices. Tell the court I love my wife. But it's also the story of a much bigger type of liberating love at work. We hear of this love in the famous passage of 1 Corinthians that I shared. This passage, I think most of us, probably the most frequent place we tend to hear it are in marriage ceremonies. How many of you had it shared at your wedding or have heard it at a wedding? Right? Like many of us have had 1 Corinthians read or heard it. But the thing about that passage is it's actually not about romantic love. It's about that bigger liberating love. We have to understand where 1 Corinthians comes from. So 1 Corinthians is actually a letter that was written by Paul of Tarsus. Paul was an apostle of Jesus who's often credited as really the key leader for developing Christianity following the death of Jesus. And Paul traveled all throughout the Mediterranean, from Palestine to Rome, preaching the life and the teachings of Jesus, building churches, and building a new religion along the way. And some of Paul's written communications with church communities throughout this territory have become enshrined in the Christian New Testament. 1 Corinthians, where our reading originates, it comes from a letter Paul sent to a church community in Corinth. Now, Corinth, at the time that this letter was written, around 53 CE, was a bustling trade city with ethnic and religious diversity. And so his letter was a response to inquiries that he'd received from the community about how to handle a variety of situations. So one example of something they were struggling with is, how do they interact with others outside of the church, especially those who were inviting members of the church to participate in pagan ceremonies? So Paul was reacting to these questions in his letter. And the passage on love that we read, it comes from a section of the letter where Paul is actually addressing a question about spiritual gifts. The community wanted to know what spiritual gifts were most important when preaching, when leading services, what was most important. And in this part of the letter, he explains that there's a whole variety of spiritual gifts that different members have to offer, such as the gift of wisdom, knowledge, faith, healing, working miracles, offering prophecy, or speaking and interpreting various languages. And he uses the analogy of the body to demonstrate how all these gifts work together, saying that one part of the body, like the ear, doesn't represent the whole body, even though it might be a vital part, right? It allows us to hear, but it's not the whole body. Instead, the body's made up with a variety of parts with its own gifts. And this is how he instructs them to accept all of the various spiritual gifts among them, of thinking of themselves as one body, and that body has all of these gifts. Yet at the same time, using the same metaphor, he also emphasizes the importance of caring for each other, regardless of these gifts. He says, if one member suffers, all suffer together with it. If one member is honored, rejoice together with it. And so it's with this setup that he then writes the passage which I shared. If I speak in the tongues of mortals and angels, but do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give away all my possessions, and if I hand over my body so that I may boast but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable. It keeps no record of wrongs. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. It's very different if you're thinking about that specifically in the context of community, isn't it? It's got a different power to it. It's not about romantic love. It's about the power of love in community. It's the passage of how a church community should treat each other with love. Such a love is everlasting, Paul writes. And while he does not use this particular word, one might say with this full description that such love is liberating. But in a world where Paul's passionate words of love in community have too often been confined to familiar and romantic love, where do we start to rekindle this sense of communal love? One way is to actually begin with that individual and interpersonal love. and let those experiences grow outward. After all, if we've never experienced love, how can we practice love with each other? Writer and activist Dr. Maya Angelou speaks of this. She speaks of how the love she experienced as a child carried her into adulthood. My grandmother raised me, Dr. Angelou shared in an interview. She said to me, "Sister, when you get, give. When you learn, teach. These are lessons to live by." People called Angelou names when she was young because she didn't speak until she was 6 years old. And Mama used to say to me when she would braid my hair, she'd say, "Sister, Mama don't care what those people say, that you must be an idiot, you must be a moron. Sister, Mama don't care. Mama know that when you and the good Lord get ready, you're going to be a teacher. Sister, you're going to teach all over the world." And Dr. Angelou, who was taught in Israel, Egypt, Rome, England, and all over the United States, says, "Every time I have another honor, I think of my grandma." And I'm so grateful that I have been loved and to be loved now and to be able to love, because that liberates. Love liberates. It doesn't just hold. That's ego. Love liberates. And Dr. Angelou, if you are familiar with any of her work, through her life, through her teaching, through her writing, shared what she received, a liberating love. Writer James Baldwin describes growing up in a very different type of family environment. He suffered the effects of growing up in a house under a tyrannical father. Eventually, he left home, and with deep despair and anger at his father and the racism that he experienced, he moved all the way to Paris in 1948. And there, Baldwin, a black gay man, fell in love. 24 years later, reflecting on his experience and its impact on his life, he wrote, "The world changes then, and it changes forever. Because you love one human being, you see everyone else very differently than you saw them before. Perhaps I only mean to say that you begin to see, and you are both stronger and more vulnerable, both free and bound. Free, paradoxically, because now you have a home, your lover's arms, and bound to that mystery, precisely a bondage that liberates you into something of the glory and the suffering of the world." Love, too, remains a theme through much of Baldwin's work, a transformative power that he believed not only changed the self, but had the power to end racism. And Baldwin, like Angelou, equates the experience of interpersonal love as some part of something bigger, as an overall power of liberating love. In this way, these two different teachers are connecting private love with public love, as made so prevalent on the end of in those days to fight the end of racism during the Civil Rights era. Like Dr. King, whose stance on the public power of love we examined a few weeks ago. Writer and educator Bell Hooks points specifically to the power of love in the civil rights movement with Dr. King. Hooks insists that liberation is not possible without love. Without love, she writes, our efforts to liberate ourselves and our world community from oppression and exploitation are doomed. As long as we refuse to address fully the practice of love in struggles for liberation, we'll not be able to create a culture of conversion where there is a mass turning away from the ethic of domination. Notice that she's taking a world view here. She's not talking about love to end racism. She's speaking of love to end all oppression. She's speaking of what she calls our collective liberation. The civil rights movement, she offers as an example, had the power to transform society because the individuals who struggled alone in community for freedom and justice wanted those gifts to be for all, not just the suffering and the oppressed. When I read this, I cannot help but think of Paul's letter to Corinth, and think of the whole world community as one interconnected body. If one member suffers, all suffer together with it. If one member is honored, all rejoice together with it. In Hook's writing, she focuses less on interpersonal love, we hear from Angelou and Baldwin, and more on the communal public power of love. She suggests specific ways beyond our own private experiences that communities can practice choosing this type of love. And she points specifically to the idea that love is a choice, right? And then once we choose to love it, that's not the end. That's actually the beginning. We're choosing to love and we're moving in a very specific direction. And when the choice of love begins, Hooks argues, that's when you begin to pay attention. And she says that there's three things that are important to this very public love, and that is paying attention, working in community, and serving others. By paying attention, she means remaining aware of the injustices of the world, developing a sense of when those injustices both impact others and also ourselves. Acknowledging the truth of our reality, she writes, both individual and collective, is a necessary stage for personal and political growth. This is usually the most painful phase of the process of learning to love, the one many of us actually seek to avoid. And when we choose to love, and we're paying this attention, she insists that we must also choose to be in community, because in community we're not taking on this work by ourselves. Working in community, she writes, whether it be sharing a project with another person or with a larger group, we are able to experience the joy in struggle. And that joy needs to be documented. For if we only focus on the pain, the difficulties, which are surely real in any process of transformation, only show us a partial picture. So this love is opening us up not just to the suffering of the world, but also the joy that can be found in the world as well. And finally, she says, when we choose to love, we also must choose to serve others. After all, she writes, in part we learn to love by giving service. So these actions combined, the paying attention, the working in community, and the serving others, these are what she calls love as a practice of freedom. I love that idea, love as a practice of freedom, right? Such a practice is an expression of the liberating love that we've heard in all of our stories today. And I think that second reading that Tom offered from Reverend Tess Baumberger lifts up all the love that's mentioned in 1 Corinthians, and she reclaims those words, and she puts it in a larger type of love in a modern context, and talks more about this liberating love that we've heard in these stories. This liberating love that we've heard from Angelou and Baldwin and Hooks. Baumberger writes, love is kind with people, but impatient with injustice. Love is assertive and respectful. Love listens to anger, to those who experience oppression without responding, without defending, without interpreting, without explaining. It listens with compassion, seeking always to understand. She concludes, love is willing always to change, always to learn, always to heal. Love rejoices in truth and equity. There's no limit to love's steady presence or its holding us gently but instantly to what is right. No, she's describing somebody or people that have chosen to love, that are paying attention, that are in community, and that are serving others. In June 1975, just 8 years after the landmark civil rights case gave the Lovings the right to marry, a drunk driver struck the Lovings' car, killing Richard at the age of 41. Mildred lived a much longer life. She lived to be 68. And in June 2007, she lived to see the 40th anniversary of the Love's Supreme Court decision. And at that point, she issued a statement. Now remember, this is 2007, right? So just to bring us back to that moment, that's close for some of us and real far away for others. 2007 was when the fight for marriage equality was really gaining momentum, but it's still 8 years before the Supreme Court cited the Loving case as a predecessor in its ruling to guarantee the right for marriage for same-sex couples. And this is the environment in which Mildred is writing her statement on the 40th anniversary of her and her husband's case. She wrote, "Surrounded as I am now by wonderful children and grandchildren, not a day goes by that I don't think of Richard and our love, our right to marry, and how much it meant to me, that freedom to marry the person precious to me, even if others thought he was the wrong kind of person for me to marry. I believe all Americans, no matter their race, no matter their sex, no matter their sexual orientation, should have that same freedom to marry. Government has no business imposing some other person's religious beliefs over others, especially if it denies people's civil rights. I'm still not a political person, but I'm proud that Richard's and my name is on the court case that can help reinforce the love, the commitment, the fairness, and the family that so many people, black or white, young or old, gay or straight, seek in life. I support the freedom to marry for all. That's what loving with a capital L and loving with a lowercase l are all about." And so may the case of the Lovings inspire us to center liberating love in our lives. From the love Dr. Maya Angelou felt as a child through her grandmother who never lost faith in her, to the love James Baldwin experienced for the first time in Paris, being transformed through his connection to another human being, to the love rooted in community as expressed by Paul in his letter to Corinth, a love that never ends, to the public love exemplified by leaders such as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., that Bell Hooks so passionately promotes in her writing, a love that we choose to embrace through paying attention, remaining intentionally engaged in community, and through serving others. So may we choose this liberating love. May it flow through us. May it be the gift we receive. May it be the gift that we give. May we learn of this love. May we practice this love. May we teach this love. So may we and the world be changed forever. I'll offer you a moment of reflection on this question asked today, which is, how might you practice liberating love? Matt's going to give us a little bit of a prelude of the next hymn. We will remain seated in reflection for a bit, and then we'll move into that hymn, number 131, Love Will Guide Us. But for now, how might you practice liberating love?
from deep within you. You can change the world with your love. Love will guide us, peace has tried us, hope inside us will lead the way on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us through the hard night. We extinguish this chalice flame, but not our promise to each other. To act with grace, to hold each other in love, to serve this community and our world. This promise of the heart serves as a reminder of how we live together. May it bring joy to our collective lives.
And so may we choose to center this liberating love in our lives. May it flow through us. May it be the gift that we receive. May it be the gift that we give. May we learn of this love. May we practice this love. May we teach this love. So may we and the world be changed forever. Blessed be, and amen. Thank you, Matt, for that lovely music today. Thank you, Tom, for being my worship associate. Thank you to John and Phil, hidden in the back room, for doing our tech. Please do stay for Coffee and Connection, hosted by our youth group. Thank you, youth group. Enjoy.